I'm Amanda Collins, 32 years old, and 3 years ago I purchased my first home, a modest but beautiful two-bedroom house that represented everything I'd worked for. Last Sunday, I invited my parents over for dinner to celebrate my promotion. I never expected my father would stand up after dessert, his face cold as stone, and demand my house keys. "This house belongs to the family now," he declared as my mother nodded. Confused and hurt, I placed the keys on the table and left quietly. The next morning, when the mortgage company called, everything changed. Before I tell you how I discovered my parents' secret plan, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had family betray your trust, hit that like button and subscribe to hear what I did next. Growing up in the Collins household meant living by strict rules. My parents, Richard and Margaret Collins, maintained control over virtually every aspect of my life, from the friends I could have to the clothes I wore. They called it protection, but as I grew older, I recognized it for what it truly was, control. Despite their overbearing nature, I believed they loved me and wanted the best for me. I just thought their methods were outdated and extreme. After high school, I fought hard for independence. While they insisted I attend the local community college and live at home, I applied for scholarships behind their backs. When the acceptance letter from State University arrived with a full academic scholarship, they couldn't argue with free education, though they made their disappointment clear. Those 4 years away transformed me. I discovered my aptitude for finance and my passion for helping others manage their money responsibly. My career in financial consulting began with an entry-level position at Richardson Financial Group. I worked ridiculous hours, took on extra projects, and earned certification after certification. By age 29, I had tripled my starting salary and saved enough for a down payment on my own home. My parents suggested I buy a condo in their neighborhood or, better yet, build an addition onto their house. When I purchased my craftsman-style home across town instead, they barely masked their disapproval. "It's too much house for one person," my father said during the housewarming. "You're wasting money on extra space," my mother added, refusing to admire the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself. That house represented everything to me: freedom, accomplishment, security. I'd spent weekends painting walls, installing ceiling fans, and creating a home office where I often worked late into the night. The backyard garden became my sanctuary, the kitchen my creative space. Every corner held meaning. It wasn't just property, it was the physical manifestation of breaking generational patterns of dependence. Recently, I'd earned a significant promotion to senior consultant, with a substantial raise and the chance to build my own client portfolio. After 5 years of watching senior colleagues take family vacations while I covered their clients, I was finally reaching the next level. The celebration dinner was supposed to mark this milestone. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs. My father's questions about my mortgage had grown increasingly specific. "What bank holds your loan? Is it a 15 or 30-year term? Did you refinance with these low rates?" At the time, I thought he was making conversation or possibly considering refinancing their own home. My mother's behavior shifted too. She began asking to store family heirlooms at my house, claiming their attic was too damp. "These should stay in the family," she would say while arranging antique picture frames on my mantel, as if my house were an extension of theirs. I'd been generous with my parents over the years. When they mentioned struggling with property taxes, I sent checks. When their furnace died last winter, I covered half the replacement cost. I never asked for repayment. They were family, after all. My brother Ryan, 2 years younger, always remained firmly in my parents' corner. As a contractor who still lived in an apartment above my parents' garage, he enjoyed a symbiotic relationship with them. They provided cheap housing, he handled home repairs, and reinforced their worldview. Unlike me, Ryan never challenged their authority or questioned their decisions. In family disagreements, he invariably sided with them, often reminding me how much our parents had sacrificed. My best friend Stephanie had warned me countless times. Your parents don't want you to succeed beyond them, she said after they diminished my excitement over the promotion. They talk about family loyalty, but they're using that to keep you obligated to them. I dismissed her concerns as overly dramatic, assuring her that despite their flaws, my parents ultimately wanted me to thrive. Trust me, I told her, they're just old-fashioned. They'll come around when they see how stable my career is becoming. Stephanie just shook her head. I hope you're right, but be careful how much you share with them. Information is power, and they've spent your whole life maintaining power over you. I should have listened more carefully to Stephanie. I should have questioned why my mother insisted on having a spare key in case of emergencies. I should have wondered why my father suddenly wanted to review my home insurance policy to make sure you're getting a good rate. The signs were there, but I was blinded by the belief that family would never truly betray you. How wrong I was. I spent all day preparing for that Sunday dinner. I marinated steaks, my father's favorite, and prepared roasted garlic mashed potatoes, just the way my mother liked them, with extra butter and a hint of rosemary. I even baked an apple pie from scratch, using my grandmother's recipe. The dining room table was set with the good china I rarely used, candles were lit, and a bottle of expensive Cabernet was breathing on the counter. This dinner represented more than a celebration of my promotion. It was my attempt to show my parents I had truly made it. Perhaps finally, they would see me as a successful adult worthy of their respect rather than the child they still tried to direct and control. Around 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath, and opened the door with a broad smile. My smile faltered when I saw not just my parents, but my brother Ryan standing on the porch. I hope you don't mind, my mother said, already stepping inside without waiting for a response. Ryan didn't have any plans tonight, so we brought him along. Of course not, I lied, quickly calculating whether I had enough food for an extra person. The more the merrier. My father handed me a bottle of inexpensive wine, the kind you pick up at the grocery store checkout. Brought your favorite, he said, though it had never been my favorite. During appetizers, the conversation remained superficial. My mother commented on the new curtains in the living room, asking where I got them and how much they cost. My father inspected the recent backsplash I'd installed in the kitchen, pointing out a small area where the grouting was uneven. Ryan said little, constantly checking his phone and smirking at texts. As I served the main course, I decided it was time to share my news. I wanted to tell you all in person why I arranged this dinner, I began, filling their wine glasses. I've been promoted to senior consultant at Richardson. It comes with a significant raise, my own office, and the chance to build my own client list. The silence that followed lasted a beat too long before my mother said, "That's nice, dear. Will you have to work more hours? That doesn't seem healthy." My father chewed his steak thoroughly before asking, "How much more will you be making?" When I told him, his eyebrows rose slightly, and he exchanged a quick glance with my mother. "Well, good for you," he said finally. "About time they recognized your work." Ryan snorted softly. Must be nice to sit in an office all day for that kind of money. I felt the familiar disappointment settle in my stomach, but pushed it away. I'm really excited about the opportunities. I've worked really hard for this. Yes, you always were focused on your career, my mother said in a tone that made it sound like a character flaw. The meal continued with strained conversation. My parents asked few questions about my promotion, but spent 15 minutes discussing Ryan's recent bathroom remodel job for a local restaurant. I noticed my father checking his watch repeatedly as we moved to dessert. As I served coffee with the apple pie, my father suddenly sat up straighter, his demeanor shifting dramatically. "Amanda," he said, his voice oddly formal. "Your mother and I have been thinking about your situation." "My situation?" I asked, genuinely confused. He nodded, placing his fork down carefully. "This house. It's too much for you, and frankly, it should be benefiting the entire family." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "What are you talking about?" "We've discussed it at length," my mother interjected. "As your parents, We've invested everything in you, your education, your upbringing, all the opportunities you've had. This success you're experiencing is a direct result of our investment." Ryan was nodding along, a small smile playing on his lips. "Your home," my father continued, "is essentially the result of family investment. We've decided it's time to recognize that officially." "What exactly are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely audible. My father's face hardened. "We're saying that this house belongs to the family now. Your mother and I will be moving in, and Ryan will handle the renovations we've been planning." Ryan leaned forward. "I'm thinking we'll knock out that wall between the kitchen and dining room first, open up the floor plan. Mom's always wanted an open concept." I looked from face to face, waiting for someone to break into laughter, to reveal this as some elaborate, albeit cruel, joke. But their expressions remained serious, expectant even. "This is my house," I said slowly. "I bought it with my money. My name is on the deed and the mortgage." "Details," my father waved dismissively. "We're family. What's yours is ours. That's how it works." "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "That's not how it works. I bought this house. I pay the mortgage. It's mine." My mother's face took on the disappointed expression she'd perfected over decades. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" "With selfishness." "Selfishness," I repeated incredulously. "How is owning what I paid for selfish?" "Leave your keys and get out," my father demanded, his voice rising. "This house belongs to the family now." My mother nodded in agreement, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "Deadly serious," my father replied. "We'll give you a week to remove your personal items. Ryan will supervise to make sure you don't take anything that should stay with the house." I felt as though I'd stepped into an alternate reality. These people, my family, were calmly discussing stealing my home, acting as if they had every right to it. The shock rendered me momentarily speechless. In that moment of stunned silence, my father extended his hand. "Keys. Now." Something inside me went very still and quiet. Without a word, I removed my house keys from my purse, placed them on the table, and stood up. I grabbed only my phone, wallet, and car keys. "You'll regret this," my father called as I walked to the door. I didn't respond. I closed the door behind me, got into my car, and drove to Stephanie's apartment across town, tears blurring my vision the entire way. "They've lost their minds," Stephanie declared after I explained what happened. "You need a lawyer first thing tomorrow." "They're my parents," I said weakly. "There must be some misunderstanding." Stephanie grabbed my shoulders. "Amanda, listen to me. They just tried to steal your house. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's a crime." As I lay awake on Stephanie's couch that night, I replayed the dinner conversation repeatedly. Had I somehow given them the impression the house was a family investment? Had I missed something critical in our relationship that would explain this bizarre behavior? No matter how I analyzed it, I couldn't make sense of what had happened. Little did I know, the true extent of their betrayal would become clear with tomorrow's phone call. I awoke on Stephanie's couch disoriented and emotionally drained. For a few blissful seconds, I didn't remember why I was there. Then the memories flooded back, my father's cold eyes, my mother's righteous nodding, my brother's smug planning for renovations to my home. My home. Stephanie had already left for work, leaving a note encouraging me to eat something and call an attorney. I was scrolling through a list of real estate lawyers when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, this is Amanda Collins," I answered, my voice still rough from crying. "Ms. Collins, this is David Herrera from Midwest Mortgage Services," a professional voice responded. "I'm calling about some unusual activity regarding your mortgage account." My stomach tightened. "What kind of activity?" "Someone attempted to change the contact information on your account yesterday afternoon. They also inquired about adding co-borrowers to the existing mortgage. Our system flagged it as suspicious since the request didn't come through our secure portal. Yesterday afternoon. While I was preparing their dinner, my parents were trying to hijack my mortgage. The individuals claimed to be co-owners of the property, David continued, but our records show you as the sole owner and borrower. I wanted to verify this information directly with you. You're correct, I confirmed, my mind racing. I am the only owner. Who exactly tried to make these changes? Richard and Margaret Collins. They provided some of your personal information, including your social security number, which is why this got escalated to me instead of being immediately denied. They had my social security number. Of course they did. They were my parents. They probably still had my birth certificate and other documents from childhood. Ms. Collins? Are you authorizing these individuals to access your mortgage information? Absolutely not, I said firmly. They have no right to my account or my property. I understand. I'll place additional security measures on your account immediately. You might want to consider contacting law enforcement if someone is attempting to fraudulently access your financial information. After hanging up, I sat motionless on Stephanie's couch, the reality of the situation sinking in. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a bizarre power play. My parents had actively attempted to take over my mortgage through deception. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I called the local police non-emergency line and explained the situation. The officer asked if my parents still had keys to the property. Yes, I admitted. I left them there last night when they told me to leave. You might want to meet officers at your residence to check if anyone has entered without authorization, he suggested. We can document any potential break-in or unauthorized occupancy. 2 hours later, I stood on my own front porch with 2 police officers, using Stephanie's spare key to my car to access the hidden emergency key I kept in a magnetic box under the fender. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door. The house was empty, but signs of my parents' presence remained. The dinner dishes were still on the table, now crusted with dried food. My house keys were gone from where I'd left them. A quick walkthrough revealed nothing obviously missing, but certain drawers in my home office stood slightly open. I'd like to document that someone has been in your home and potentially accessed your personal information, Officer Rodriguez said, making notes in her report. I strongly recommend changing your locks today. She was handing me her card when my phone rang again. It was a local law office. Is this Amanda Collins? This is Barbara Mitchell from Mitchell Legal Services. Your friend Stephanie asked me to call you about a property dispute. An hour later, I sat in Barbara's office, surrounded by law books and framed credentials. She was in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. Let me get this straight, she said, after hearing my story. Your parents demanded your house keys, claimed your property as family property, and attempted to change your mortgage information without your knowledge or consent? Yes, I confirmed, still struggling to believe it myself. And you've verified you're the sole owner on all documentation? No co-signers on the mortgage? No financial contributions from family members for the down payment? None. I saved for the down payment myself. Every mortgage payment has come from my account for the past 3 years. Barbara nodded, making notes. With your permission, I'd like to run a comprehensive background check on your parents. If they've attempted this type of fraud before, it could strengthen any case we build. I hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Within 30 minutes, Barbara's investigator had compiled a troubling report. Your parents have significant financial problems, Barbara explained, reviewing the information. 3 credit cards in collections, a tax lien from 2 years ago, and it appears they've taken a second mortgage on their own home recently. They're underwater financially. The picture became painfully clear. My parents weren't just being controlling, they were desperate. My recent promotion and raise had likely convinced them I could solve their financial problems by taking my house. What's most concerning, Barbara continued, is this isn't their first attempt at something like this. There was a complaint filed by your maternal grandmother 7 years ago, alleging your parents attempted to transfer her retirement accounts into their names. The complaint was later withdrawn, but the documentation exists. My grandmother had always been kind but somewhat distant. She passed away 5 years ago, and my parents handled all her affairs. Now I wondered what really happened between them. I broke down in Barbara's office, the weight of betrayal crushing my chest. Not only had my parents attempted to steal my home, but they had a history of financial manipulation. How could I have been so blind? I know this is overwhelming, Barbara said gently, passing me a box of tissues. But we need to act quickly to protect your assets. First, we'll send a formal cease and desist letter. Then we'll file for a temporary restraining order to keep them away from your property while we sort this out. As I signed the necessary paperwork, my phone buzzed with text messages from my brother. You're overreacting. Parents just want to help you manage the house. Family looks out for each other. You've always been selfish. Dad says if you get lawyers involved, you're no longer welcome at family gatherings. I showed the messages to Barbara, who added them to her file. Classic manipulation tactics, she observed. They're trying to make you feel guilty for protecting your own property. When I left the attorney's office, Stephanie was waiting outside to drive me to a locksmith. You're staying with me until this gets sorted, she insisted. I don't trust them not to show up at your place. I can't impose on you like that, I protested weakly. You're not imposing. You're accepting help from someone who actually cares about your well-being, not what they can take from you. That night, after changing all my locks and setting up credit monitoring alerts, I received a call from my boss, Martin. Amanda, I heard you're dealing with a family emergency, he said, concern evident in his voice. How did you know? I asked, surprised. Your father called the office asking for your employment verification for some kind of family financial consolidation. When I told him we don't release employee information without written consent, he became quite agitated. Is everything okay? I briefly explained the situation, mortified that my family drama had reached my workplace. Take whatever personal time you need, Martin offered immediately. Your job and promotion are secure. And I'll alert security not to allow your family members into the building. After we hung up, I checked my voicemail and found a threatening message from my father. You're making a big mistake, Amanda. We're your family. We have rights to what's yours. If you fight this, you'll regret it. I played the message for Barbara via email, and she responded that it strengthened our case for a restraining order. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in Stephanie's guest room, replaying my entire relationship with my parents, questioning every memory, every interaction. Had their love always been conditional? Had I always been viewed as a resource rather than a daughter? The thought unleashed a wave of grief so intense I could barely breathe. By dawn, I had made a decision. I would not only protect myself legally, but would also pursue every available option to ensure my parents couldn't victimize me or anyone else again. No matter how painful, I needed to stand my ground. 2 days after the disastrous dinner, I returned to my house accompanied by a police officer and a locksmith. Barbara had advised me to document everything and have official witnesses present. The new locks had been installed, and I was there to assess if anything had been taken during my absence. As we pulled into the driveway, I was shocked to see my parents' car and my brother's truck parked on the street. My stomach dropped. Those are my parents' vehicles, I told Officer Wilson. They shouldn't be here. Stay in your car until I check it out, he instructed, approaching my front door. Through my windshield, I watched him knock and identify himself. The door opened to reveal my father, looking indignant but not surprised. After a brief conversation, Officer Wilson motioned for me to join them. Walking up my own sidewalk felt surreal, like approaching a stranger's home. When I reached the porch, I could see past my father into the living room, where my mother and Ryan were rearranging my furniture. They had actually moved my couch to the opposite wall and were in the process of taking down the artwork I had carefully selected. Ms. Collins has identified you as unauthorized occupants of her residence, Officer Wilson stated formally. Can you provide documentation showing you have a legal right to be in this property? My father puffed up his chest. We're her parents. This house is family property. Do you have your name on the deed or mortgage? The officer asked. We don't need that. We're family, my father insisted. We contributed to her success, which paid for this house. That's not how property law works, sir. Unless your name is on the legal documents, you have no right to enter or occupy this residence without the owner's permission. My mother stepped forward, tears already forming. Amanda, how could you bring police to your family? We raised you better than this. I found my voice. How could you try to steal my house? You raised me better than that. Ryan emerged from the hallway carrying a box of what appeared to be my personal documents. This is ridiculous. We're just helping organize things. By taking my personal files? I challenged. Put that down, Ryan. Ms. Collins, Officer Wilson interjected. Do you want these individuals removed from your property? Yes, I said firmly, ignoring my mother's gasp. And I want to check what they've taken. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. Under police supervision, my family was required to leave my home. My father grew increasingly agitated, making vague threats about family loyalty and how I would regret this betrayal. My mother alternated between crying and cold anger. Ryan simply glared at me, muttering about my true colors finally showing. After they finally left, I discovered several items missing: my grandmother's jewelry box, my birth certificate and social security card, financial documents including previous tax returns, and, oddly, several framed family photos. A quick check of my home office revealed they had accessed my computer, though I couldn't immediately tell what they might have viewed or taken. I'd like to file a report for the stolen items, I told Officer Wilson, who nodded sympathetically. You should also consider a restraining order, he advised. Family situations can escalate quickly. Over the next few days, that prediction proved painfully accurate. I received a barrage of accusatory text messages, not just from my immediate family, but from aunts, uncles, and cousins who had been fed a distorted version of events. How could you throw your parents out of your house? My Aunt Caroline wrote. Your parents gave you everything, and this is how you repay them, came from an uncle I barely knew. My father had apparently told everyone that they had invested significantly in my house, and I was now stealing family property. No mention of their unauthorized entry or attempted mortgage fraud. My parents even created social media posts painting themselves as victims of an ungrateful daughter, tagging mutual friends and extended family. The public shaming was excruciating, particularly when former high school classmates and distant relatives began commenting with their disappointment in me. Stephanie helped me draft a simple, factual response that I sent privately to those who reached out. I'm sorry you've been given incorrect information. My parents attempted to claim ownership of my home, which I purchased independently. This is now a legal matter, and I won't be discussing it further. Some backed off immediately, but others doubled down, insisting that family matters should stay private and I should work things out without lawyers. Few seemed concerned about the actual facts. Meanwhile, my attorney received a certified letter from a lawyer my parents had retained, claiming they had a verbal agreement that my home was a family investment property and demanding mediation. Barbara assured me their claims had no legal merit, but the stress was taking its toll. I couldn't sleep. I barely ate. Going to work became an exercise in maintaining a professional facade while falling apart inside. I jumped at every phone notification, dreading another attack from my family. Then one evening, returning home from work, I found my porch light broken and a note tucked into my door frame. Family takes care of its own. One way or another. The implied threat sent me straight to Barbara's office the next morning. She immediately filed for an emergency restraining order against my parents and brother. This crosses a line, she said, reviewing the police report I'd filed about the note. Their behavior is becoming increasingly concerning. While I recognized the necessity of legal protection, a part of me still hesitated at completely severing ties with my family. Despite everything, these were the people who had raised me, who had attended my graduations, who featured in holiday memories and childhood photos. Could I really cut them out of my life entirely? I know this is difficult, Barbara said gently, reading my expression. But ask yourself, if these weren't your parents, if they were friends or colleagues who treated you this way, would you hesitate to protect yourself? That night, I lay awake in my newly secured home, surrounded by new security cameras and motion sensor lights, feeling more alone than I ever had. Around 3 a.m., I finally admitted to myself what I had been avoiding. The parents I thought I had, flawed but loving, didn't exist. The people who tried to steal my home were showing me who they truly were, perhaps who they had always been. The realization brought both grief and clarity. I could mourn the family I thought I had while still protecting myself from the family that actually existed. The next morning, I contacted a therapist who specialized in family trauma and made an appointment. If I was going to navigate this betrayal, I needed professional support. As I was leaving for work, my credit monitoring app pinged with an alert. Someone had attempted to open a credit card in my name. The application had been flagged because the address listed was my parents' home. I forwarded the alert to Barbara, who added it to our growing file of evidence. Identity theft is a serious crime, she noted. This strengthens our case significantly. 2 days later, I received notice of our court date for the restraining order hearing. Barbara prepared me for what to expect, warning that my parents would likely play the role of concerned, loving family members wrongfully accused. The judge will look at evidence, not emotions, she assured me. And we have substantial evidence of their inappropriate and potentially criminal behavior. The night before the hearing, I could barely function from anxiety. The thought of facing my family in court, of publicly acknowledging their betrayal, made me physically ill. But beneath the anxiety was a growing sense of resolve. I had done nothing wrong. I had worked hard for everything I had. I deserved to protect what was mine. No matter how painful the confrontation would be, I would not back down. The county courthouse was intimidating, all marble columns and echoing hallways. I arrived early with Barbara, dressed in a conservative navy suit, my hands shaking slightly as I clutched my portfolio of evidence. Remember, Barbara said quietly as we waited, stick to facts. Don't let them provoke an emotional response. When my parents and brother entered with their attorney, they presented a carefully crafted image, my father looking distinguished in a suit that had seen better days, my mother fragile and teary-eyed, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Ryan stood protectively beside them, playing the role of supportive son. They didn't acknowledge me, though my mother's eyes briefly met mine before darting away. Their attorney, James Westfield, approached Barbara with a proposal before the hearing began. My clients are willing to drop this whole unfortunate misunderstanding, if Ms. Collins will agree to family counseling and allowing her parents reasonable access to the property they helped secure. Barbara's response was ice cold. Your clients attempted mortgage fraud, unauthorized entry, theft of personal documents, and identity theft. There is no misunderstanding here, and we're proceeding with the restraining order request. When our case was called, we entered the courtroom. Judge Elena Martinez, a woman in her 60s with penetrating eyes, reviewed our petition silently before looking up. I understand this is a family dispute over property ownership, she began. Your Honor, Westfield interjected smoothly, this is simply a communication breakdown between well-meaning parents and their daughter. The Collins family has always operated as a financial unit, with resources shared for the common good. Barbara presented our evidence methodically. The mortgage company's statement about the unauthorized access attempt, the police report from finding my parents in my home, documentation of the stolen items, the threatening note, and the identity theft attempt. Furthermore, she added, we've discovered previous incidents where Mr. and Mrs. Collins attempted similar financial appropriation with Ms. Collins' grandmother. My parents' attorney objected, claiming the previous incident was irrelevant and had been resolved privately. When it was my parents' turn to respond, they presented a tearful performance that was both painful and infuriating to witness. "We only wanted to help our daughter," my mother said, dabbing at her eyes. "She's always been impulsive with financial decisions. We were trying to protect the family investment." "What family investment?" Judge Martinez asked pointedly. "Did you contribute financially to the purchase of this home?" "Not directly," my father admitted, "but we raised her, educated her, made her who she is. Everything she is comes from our sacrifices." The judge's expression remained neutral, but her questions became increasingly specific about financial transactions, legal documents, and the timeline of events. With each answer, my parents' story unraveled further. When Ryan testified about just helping organize some paperwork, Judge Martinez asked him directly about the box of documents he had been carrying when the police arrived. "Those were family papers," he claimed. "Tax returns with only Ms. Collins' name and social security number are family papers?" the judge asked skeptically. By the end of the hearing, Judge Martinez had heard enough. She granted the temporary restraining order, prohibiting my parents and brother from coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace for the next 90 days. Based on the evidence presented, she stated, "There appears to be a concerning pattern of attempted financial control and potentially fraudulent activity. Ms. Collins has the right to protect her legally obtained property." As we left the courtroom, my mother called out, "Amanda, please. We're your family." I kept walking, Barbara's hand supportively on my elbow. The legal victory should have brought relief, but instead, it unleashed a new wave of family warfare. Word of the restraining order spread through our extended family like wildfire, creating distinct battle lines. Most relatives sided with my parents, viewing the legal action as an unforgivable betrayal of family loyalty. But to my surprise, my mother's sister, Aunt Jessica, reached out with a very different perspective. "I've been waiting for years for someone to stand up to them," she said when we met for coffee. "They did something similar to your grandmother, you know." Tried to convince her she was incapable of managing her finances and nearly took control of her accounts. I intervened then, and they've barely spoken to me since. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, stunned by this confirmation. "Would you have believed me?" she countered gently. "We want to believe the best of our parents. It's how we survive childhood." Aunt Jessica's support was a lifeline in an otherwise hostile family environment, but my brother's behavior grew increasingly concerning. Despite the restraining order, he began driving past my house regularly. Neighbors reported seeing his truck parked down the street on multiple occasions. He never approached the house directly, careful not to technically violate the order, but his presence felt threatening nonetheless. Meanwhile, anonymous notes appeared in my mailbox. "Family sticks together, and blood is thicker than water, and, most disturbingly, you can't hide behind lawyers forever." I reported each one to the police, but without direct evidence of who left them, there was little they could do. The stress began affecting my work performance. Despite Martin's understanding, I found myself making uncharacteristic errors, missing details in client presentations, forgetting important calls. The promotion I had worked so hard for was becoming jeopardized by my family's relentless campaign. Barbara suggested installing additional security measures. "Your parents and brother might be escalating because the legal system didn't give them what they wanted," she explained. "Sometimes this kind of behavior gets worse before it gets better." I invested in a comprehensive security system with cameras covering every approach to my home. I changed my phone number and email address, creating special filters to catch messages from my family's known accounts. I even began varying my routes to work and checking my car before driving. Precautions that seemed excessive, but brought some peace of mind. 3 weeks after the restraining order was granted, I discovered someone had attempted to access my bank accounts online, triggering security protocols that locked the accounts. The IP address traced back to my parents' internet service provider. Barbara added this to our growing file and suggested we pursue additional legal charges. "They're not respecting the restraining order's spirit, even if they're careful about the letter of the law," she pointed out. We need to show there are serious consequences for this behavior. The final straw came when a client mentioned receiving a disturbing email about me, supposedly from a concerned family member, claiming I was mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. Similar emails had been sent to several clients and to Martin. Fortunately, Martin recognized the allegations as baseless and alerted me immediately. "This crosses every professional and personal boundary," he said, forwarding me the email. "Our legal team will address this as defamation against an employee." With this new evidence, Barbara filed for a permanent restraining order and added claims of defamation, harassment, and ongoing attempted fraud. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. This time, I entered the courtroom with less anxiety and more righteous anger. My parents' actions had gone beyond a misguided attempt to control my assets. They were now actively trying to destroy my professional reputation and livelihood. Judge Martinez remembered our case and reviewed the new evidence with visible concern. "This pattern of escalation is deeply troubling," she noted. "What began as a property dispute has evolved into what appears to be a coordinated campaign of harassment." My father's indignant denials fell flat in the face of digital evidence linking the defamatory emails to my parents' computer. My mother's tears seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. Even their attorney appeared uncomfortable with the direction the case had taken. "Your Honor," my father interrupted during Barbara's presentation, "this is all being blown out of proportion. We're just trying to help our daughter who clearly isn't thinking clearly." Judge Martinez fixed him with a stern look. "Mr. Collins, I suggest you allow your attorney to speak for you. Your interventions are not helping your case." When Ryan's turn came to testify about his repeated presence near my home, his explanation was both flimsy and revealing. "I was just checking on my sister's property, making sure everything was okay. Despite the restraining order prohibiting you from coming within 500 feet of that property," the judge asked. "Family obligation trumps court papers," Ryan replied, his true perspective finally showing through the careful facade. "That is not how the law works, Mr. Collins," Judge Martinez stated firmly. The judge not only granted the permanent restraining order, but also issued a stern warning that any further violations would result in criminal charges. "The court takes harassment and attempted fraud very seriously," she emphasized. "Family relationships do not exempt anyone from legal consequences for harmful actions." As the ruling was announced, Ryan suddenly stood up. "This is bullshit," he shouted. "She's turning her back on family. She owes us. Restrain your client." Judge Martinez ordered their attorney as bailiffs approached. "Contempt of court," the judge declared as Ryan continued his tirade. "Mr. Collins will spend the night in county jail to reflect on appropriate courtroom behavior." Watching my brother being led away in handcuffs should have felt like vindication. Instead, it filled me with a profound sadness. How had we reached this point? The family I grew up with was now unrecognizable to me, transformed by greed and entitlement into people I no longer knew or wanted to know. As Barbara and I left the courthouse, she squeezed my shoulder gently. "It's never easy when family turns on you," she said. "But you've handled this with remarkable strength." I didn't feel strong. I felt hollowed out, exhausted by months of constant anxiety and grief. The legal battle might be won, but the emotional war was far from over. 3 months after the final restraining order was issued, I was slowly rebuilding my life. The security measures had become routine. The panic attacks were less frequent. My work performance had stabilized, and I was finally beginning to enjoy the benefits of my promotion. Then came the text message from an unknown number. "We should talk. Coffee at Sterling's tomorrow?" "Dad." My heart raced as I forwarded the message to Barbara, who confirmed it technically violated the restraining order, but advised letting it go unless they persisted. "Sometimes it's better to conserve your emotional energy," she suggested. "They may be testing boundaries." A week later, a formal letter arrived from my parents' attorney, proposing a family reconciliation meeting, at a neutral location, with both legal representatives present. After discussing it with my therapist, Dr. Levine, I cautiously agreed. "You've done tremendous work processing this trauma," she said during our session. "Meeting them from your position of strength might provide closure, regardless of the outcome." The meeting was set for a private room at a local restaurant. Barbara accompanied me, while my parents brought their new attorney, a woman named Patricia Wong, who specialized in family mediation. My parents looked different somehow, smaller, less intimidating. My father had lost weight, and my mother's hair showed more gray than I remembered. They sat stiffly across the table, hands clasped before them like penitent schoolchildren. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," my father began formally. "We've had time to reflect on our actions." What followed was not quite an apology. They acknowledged misunderstandings and poor communication, but stopped short of taking full responsibility for their attempted theft and subsequent harassment. "We only wanted what was best for the family," my mother insisted. "Perhaps our methods were misguided." "Misguided?" I repeated, maintaining my composure with effort. "You tried to steal my house, stole my personal documents, attempted identity theft, and tried to damage my professional reputation. Those aren't misguided methods. Those are crimes." My father's jaw tightened. "We've admitted we made mistakes. What more do you want?" "Actual accountability," I replied. "Recognition of what you really did and why. And assurance it will never happen again, to me or anyone else." Their attorney suggested we focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on past grievances. Barbara quickly countered that accountability was essential to any meaningful reconciliation. As the tense conversation continued, it became increasingly clear that my parents wanted the restraining order lifted and access to my life restored, but without truly acknowledging the harm they had caused. They framed their actions as misunderstood attempts to help, rather than the controlling, manipulative behavior they actually were. "We're your parents," my mother said tearfully. "Family should forgive." "Forgiveness requires honesty," I responded. "And it doesn't automatically mean restoration of trust." When the topic turned to Ryan, they admitted he was still angry, but claimed he was working through his feelings. They suggested family therapy as a path forward, with all four of us attending together. I considered their proposal carefully before responding. "I'm open to continued communication under certain conditions," I finally said. "First, full acknowledgement of what actually happened, not euphemisms or minimizing. Second, individual therapy for each of you before any group sessions. And third, absolutely no discussion of my finances or property. Those topics are permanently off limits." My father's face darkened. "So you get to dictate the terms of our relationship now?" "I get to set boundaries," I corrected him. "You get to decide if you can respect them." The meeting ended without resolution. My parents would think about my conditions, but their body language and tone suggested they found them unreasonable. As Barbara and I walked to our cars, she nodded approvingly. "You were clear, firm, and fair. The ball is in their court now." 2 days later, I received a letter from my parents, not through their attorney, but a personal note in my mother's handwriting. It contained no apology, only a statement that if I couldn't forgive and forget without conditions, then perhaps it was best we take a break from communication. The letter ended with, "When you're ready to be part of this family again without all these legal obstacles, you know where to find us." The message was clear. They were unwilling to acknowledge their actions or respect my boundaries. In their view, I was the problem. Strangely, instead of devastating me, the letter brought clarity and a sense of peace. I took it to my next therapy session, where Dr. Levine helped me process what it meant. "They're showing you who they are," she observed. "They're showing you that their version of family requires your compliance and surrender of boundaries." "So what now?" I asked. "They're still my parents. Now you decide what kind of relationship is healthy for you, if any. Family can be about biology, or it can be about mutual respect and support. Sometimes those overlap, and sometimes they don't. Over the following weeks, I made a conscious decision to focus on rebuilding my life rather than fixing a family dynamic that the other parties had no interest in changing. I returned to work with renewed focus and energy. I re-engaged with friends I had neglected during the crisis. I even joined a support group for adults dealing with family estrangement, where I found understanding and validation from others with similar experiences. My home, once a source of pride that became tainted by my family's betrayal, needed reclaiming. I hired contractors to renovate the kitchen, a project I had long planned but never started. I repainted walls, rearranged furniture, and replaced the artwork my parents had tried to remove with new pieces that spoke to me. Each change helped erase the memory of finding them in my space, attempting to claim it as their own. For added security and peace of mind, I installed a comprehensive smart home system that alerted me to any activity around my property. The constant fear of finding threatening notes or seeing my brother's truck gradually subsided as weeks passed without incident. 6 months after the final court hearing, I received an unexpected promotion at work. Martin called me into his office to deliver the news personally. "The way you handled yourself during that family crisis impressed everyone in upper management," he said. "You showed remarkable professionalism and resilience under extreme stress. Those are exactly the qualities we need in our new director of client services." The irony wasn't lost on me. The very crisis my family had created ultimately advanced the career they had tried to diminish. In attempting to control me, they had inadvertently pushed me toward greater independence and success. As the holiday season approached, traditionally a difficult time for those estranged from family, Stephanie and several other friends invited me to join their celebrations. "Chosen family is still family," Stephanie insisted. "Sometimes it's the healthier version." The first Thanksgiving without my parents and brother felt strange, but not as painful as I had feared. Surrounded by friends who genuinely supported me and respected my boundaries, I found myself enjoying the holiday in a way I hadn't in years. There was no walking on eggshells, no subtle criticisms of my life choices, no tension beneath the surface pleasantries. In early December, I ran into my brother at the grocery store, our first encounter since the courtroom. He saw me first, his face registering shock before hardening into a scowl. I prepared myself for confrontation, but instead, he simply turned his cart around and walked in the opposite direction. His retreat, rather than aggression, confirmed that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. Later that month, I received holiday cards from several extended family members who had initially sided with my parents. The messages were cautious but friendly, suggesting that perhaps the tide of family opinion was turning as more relatives recognized the truth of the situation. Aunt Jessica invited me to her New Year's gathering, gently mentioning that my parents would not be attending. "They've burned too many bridges," she explained. "It's not just you they've alienated." As the new year began, I realized I had crossed an invisible threshold. The constant anxiety about my family had been replaced by occasional sadness, but also by a profound sense of freedom. I no longer felt compelled to earn their approval or meet their expectations. I could simply be myself, successful or struggling, perfect or flawed, without fear of manipulation or conditional love. One evening, sorting through old photographs, I found myself able to look at family pictures without the immediate pain that had previously accompanied them. I could acknowledge the good memories while also recognizing the unhealthy patterns that had always existed beneath the surface. "It's like grieving someone who's still alive," I explained to Dr. Levine. "I'm mourning the parents I thought I had, while accepting the reality of who they actually are." "That's an important distinction," she agreed. "And it allows you to honor your experiences, both positive and negative, without denying either." By spring, I had begun dating again, cautiously allowing someone new into my life. Jason, a landscape architect I met through a mutual friend, listened attentively when I eventually shared my family story. Unlike previous relationships where I had minimized my parents' controlling behavior, I was now honest about the estrangement and my boundaries. "Family is complicated," he said simply. "I admire how you've handled it." His respect for my experience, without judgment or uncomfortable advice about reconciliation, was refreshingly supportive. For the first time, I felt I could build a relationship based on honesty rather than presenting a carefully edited version of my life and family. As the one-year anniversary of the initial confrontation approached, I found myself reflecting on the profound changes the year had brought. I had lost my biological family but gained clarity, strength, and authentic connections. I had reclaimed not just my home but my autonomy and self-worth. The final step in my journey came in the form of a letter I wrote but never sent, a letter to my parents expressing everything I had come to understand about our relationship. I didn't write it for them but for myself, to articulate the lessons I had learned and the boundaries I would maintain going forward. "I now understand that true family supports your growth rather than controlling it," I wrote. "True family respects boundaries rather than violating them. True family celebrates your success rather than feeling threatened by it. I deserved better than what you offered, and I've found it elsewhere." After completing the letter, I read it aloud to myself, feeling the truth of each word resonate within me. Then I placed it in a box along with old family photos and mementos, not to forget, but to acknowledge that chapter of my life while continuing to write new ones. I had survived my family's betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentic. The house keys they had demanded that Sunday evening had become symbolic of a larger truth. I held the keys to my own life, and I would never again surrender them to anyone who didn't respect my right to use them as I chose. 1 year after that fateful Sunday dinner, I hosted a housewarming party to celebrate the complete renovation of my home. The kitchen now featured the open concept my brother had ironically envisioned, but designed to my specifications with gleaming quartz countertops and custom cabinets. The living room had been repainted in soothing sage green, and new hardwood floors ran throughout the main level. Every change represented a conscious choice to reclaim my space and transform it from a site of trauma into a sanctuary. Stephanie arrived early to help with final preparations, bringing a house-shaped ornament engraved with Amanda's Haven. "It's officially been a year," she said, hanging the ornament on a potted ficus near the entryway. "How are you feeling?" "Lighter," I replied after considering the question. "Like I've put down something heavy I didn't realize I was carrying all my life." The gathering included colleagues, friends from my support group, Aunt Jessica, and even Barbara, who had become more than just my attorney. The house filled with conversation and laughter, a stark contrast to the tension-filled family gatherings of my past. My journey toward healing hadn't been linear. There were still days when grief ambushed me, usually triggered by small things, finding an old birthday card signed, "Love Always, Mom and Dad," hearing a song that reminded me of childhood road trips, or simply driving past their neighborhood. But those moments no longer derailed me completely. I had developed tools to acknowledge the pain without being consumed by it. Dr. Levine had helped me establish healthy boundaries in all areas of my life. I learned to recognize warning signs in relationships, personal and professional, and to address concerns directly rather than accommodating behaviors that made me uncomfortable. The people worth keeping in my life respected these boundaries. Those who didn't naturally filtered themselves out. My promotion to Director of Client Services came with new responsibilities that challenged and energized me. I found myself mentoring younger colleagues, particularly those struggling with work-life balance or family pressures. My experience had given me perspective and empathy that made me a more effective leader. "You've helped me stand up to my parents about career choices," Emily, a junior consultant, told me during a mentoring session. "Seeing how you've thrived despite family conflict gives me hope." Though I never shared the specific details of my family situation at work, the general outline of my story had spread, and several colleagues confided similar experiences. What once felt like a shameful secret became a source of connection and mutual support. The community support group I joined eventually asked me to co-facilitate meetings. Twice monthly, I sat in a circle with others navigating family estrangement, sharing strategies for holidays, handling mutual acquaintances, and processing the complex emotions that accompanied setting boundaries with parents or siblings. Family estrangement isn't a failure, I often reminded the group. Sometimes it's the healthiest choice available when reconciliation requires sacrificing your well-being or identity. 3 months after my housewarming, I encountered my brother unexpectedly at the hardware store. Our eyes met across the paint section, and his face immediately hardened. Instead of avoiding me as he had previously, he approached with barely contained hostility. "Mom's been sick," he said without greeting. Not that you'd care. The accusation stung, but I maintained my composure. "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope she's getting good care. Now you're concerned?" After tearing the family apart, his voice rose, drawing attention from nearby shoppers. "Ryan, this isn't the place for this conversation," I said quietly. "There is no place for it because you chose lawyers over family," he snapped before walking away, leaving his shopping basket abandoned beside the paint chips. The encounter left me shaken, but also confirmed I had made the right decision. Ryan's anger remained unchanged, showing no recognition of the harm my parents had attempted to cause. In his narrative, I remained the villain for protecting myself. Through Aunt Jessica, I occasionally heard updates about my parents. Their financial troubles had apparently worsened. They had been forced to refinance their home again and were considering downsizing. My father had taken a part-time job in retirement, and my mother complained frequently about their circumstances to anyone who would listen. "They still blame you," Aunt Jessica reported candidly. "In their version, you owe them for raising you, and your success should be their retirement plan." Rather than satisfaction at their struggles, I felt a complicated mix of sadness and relief, sad for the relationship we might have had under different circumstances, but relieved that their financial problems were no longer mine to solve. My own relationship with money had transformed. Working with a financial therapist alongside Dr. Levine helped me recognize unhealthy patterns I had absorbed from my family, equating money with worth, seeing financial success as something to hide or apologize for, and feeling guilty about setting boundaries around lending and giving. "Money is just a tool," my financial therapist emphasized. "It's not a measure of your value as a person, and it's not something you owe to others simply because they want it." This perspective allowed me to be more intentional with my finances. I established a structured giving plan, supporting causes I believed in rather than responding to emotional manipulation. I created clear guidelines for when and how I would help friends in need, ensuring my generosity came from choice rather than obligation or guilt. Perhaps the most significant development in my healing journey was my growing relationship with Jason. Unlike previous partners who found my family situation too complicated or pressured me to reconcile for the sake of harmony, Jason respected my boundaries without question. "Your family experience is part of you," he said during a deep conversation about our backgrounds, "but it doesn't define you. You've built something beautiful from a difficult situation." His own family was close-knit but respectful of adult children's autonomy, a dynamic so different from my experience that it initially felt foreign. The first time I attended a holiday gathering with them, I braced myself for underlying tension or passive-aggressive comments that never came. Instead, I witnessed genuine affection and healthy disagreement. Family members who could differ in opinion while still respecting each other. "Is your family always like this?" I asked Jason afterward. "Like what?" "So, normal. Functional. No one tried to manipulate anyone or stormed out or made cryptic comments about disappointment." He laughed before realizing I was serious. "That's how family should be, Amanda. Supportive but not enmeshed. Loving without conditions." As our relationship deepened, I found myself able to envision a future that included building my own family, something I had previously feared would replicate the toxic patterns I grew up with. Through therapy and self-reflection, I came to understand that awareness was my greatest protection against repeating history. I could choose a different path. On the anniversary of receiving the permanent restraining order, I wrote a letter to myself acknowledging my growth and resilience. It wasn't about celebrating the legal victory, but recognizing the inner strength that had carried me through the darkest period of my life. You survived the unimaginable, I wrote. You protected what was yours, not just your property, but your dignity, your independence, your right to self-determination. You discovered that family isn't defined by DNA, but by respect, support, and unconditional positive regard. You learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and boundaries aren't selfish, but necessary for healthy relationships. Most importantly, you found your voice and the courage to use it. This letter, unlike the one I had written to my parents, I kept in my nightstand drawer to read whenever doubts crept in or when lingering guilt threatened my peace. The true meaning of ownership became clearer to me through this journey. Owning property was significant, but owning my life, my choices, my values, my right to determine who had access to my heart and home, was the real achievement. My parents had attempted to claim ownership of everything I had built, but in doing so, they forced me to recognize my ultimate authority over my own existence. The question of forgiveness arose frequently in therapy and support group discussions. Many people assumed forgiveness was necessary for healing, but my experience suggested something more nuanced. I had come to a place of acceptance about my parents' limitations and the reality of our relationship. I no longer carried active anger or resentment that poisoned my daily life. But traditional forgiveness, the kind that restored trust and relationship, felt inappropriate without acknowledgement or change from my parents. Perhaps there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, Dr. Levine suggested. You can release the burden of anger without resuming a relationship that caused harm. This distinction brought peace. I could wish my parents well from a distance, hope for their growth and healing, without subjecting myself to further attempts at control or manipulation. I could acknowledge the good they had provided in my childhood without using it to justify or excuse the harm they had attempted as adults. Building a life on an authentic foundation became my focus moving forward. Every relationship, every commitment, every goal needed to align with my core values rather than external expectations or fear of disapproval. This clarity brought confidence in decisions that previously would have caused anxiety about others' reactions. As the seasons changed and another year began, I found myself reflecting on the paradox of my family's betrayal. In trying to take what was mine, they had inadvertently given me something precious. The courage to define family on my own terms and build connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation. During a quiet moment at home, surrounded by the space I had reclaimed and transformed, I considered how to share this journey with others who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. The support group was one avenue, but perhaps there were other ways to transform my experience into something that could help others. What does family truly mean? Is it defined by blood and legal ties, or by the quality of connection and respect between individuals? How do we honor our needs for both belonging and autonomy? These questions had no simple answers, but exploring them had led me to a more authentic life than I had ever imagined possible. As I prepare to share this story with you, I wonder about your experiences with family boundaries and betrayal. Have you ever had to choose between peace and relationship? What helped you navigate that difficult territory? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and self-discovery. Remember that wherever you are in your own story, you deserve relationships that honor your worth and respect your boundaries. Thank you for witnessing my truth, and I wish you courage on your own path toward authentic connection.